Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
I will not be at Davos. And if Dr. Klaus Schwab's people came to me and said, do a panel, this is the year where I would say, I want to do a panel, but I want it to be just one person. And it would be Ian Bremmer. Every year, he and his team, John Lieber among others, put out a thing called the top risks. And it's not funny, it's a really serious look at where we are going into a given year. And it's remarkably prescient. Some things he gets wrong, but huge amount of, OMG, how'd you do that, like Merkel in Germany years ago. But he's really outdone himself this year, hearkening back to his classic G0 of 2012. Dr. Bremmer joins us this morning. Ian, I'm just gonna cut right to the chase. The summation of your top risk 2025 is a reversion to the 1930s. How close are we to the 1935 of Hermann Vauch's Winds of War?
Well, we're close to the 30s and we're close to the 50s. So in other words, the trajectory is not sustainable. And the question is whether the crisis that's coming is big enough to make us pay attention, but not so big that we all end up fighting each other, right? I mean, in the early Cold War, we had this unfettered decoupling and arms race between the Americans and the Soviets, culminated in the Cuban Missile Crisis. We almost blew ourselves up. And then we started recognizing we needed actually to have some institutions that would create more stability between the two countries, arms control hotline and the rest. You see shades of that, and you also see shades of the 30s with a United States that's incredibly powerful, but is unwinding its own global order, its own institutions.
Right.
I mean, you look at things like the United Nations and the WTO, and these are organizations the Americans put in place to coordinate global governance, and that now Americans don't believe in. So it's not clear, but it's clearly, as you say, Tom, this is a definitive moment.
Ian, what's so important here, and I lived this. My grandfather was a textbook Chicago Tribune isolationist of middle America, and you go back to Lindbergh and the rest of them. What is the character of President Trump's isolationism?
I don't think it's isolationist. I think it is strongly unilateralist. And so it's not that the United States is saying we're only going to focus at home. I mean, the Panama Canal and Greenland and Canada comments don't feel isolationist to me, but they're deeply transactional. And in many ways, Tom, what we have is that the Americans are embracing the Chinese worldview that has served China so well over the last 35 years. It's transactional. It's not about rule of law. They don't care what your political system or economic system is like. They will engage with you bilaterally with the intention of being more powerful than you, and therefore you have to play by their rules. And what the Americans are saying is, actually, China, we can do that, and we can do it a lot better than you can, because we're a lot stronger than you, by the way. And that's really what Trump is saying. And it does come at a time when America's adversaries, Russia in deep decline, Iran having lost their empire by proxy, the Chinese in the worst economic conditions since the 90s, maybe the 70s, are particularly weak. So it's an interesting moment to try this experiment. A lot of things are probably going to break as a consequence.
Dr. Bremmer, your Eurasia Group's top 10 risks are required reading at the beginning of every year, and this year's is no different. U.S., China, Russia, Iran, Mexico, I mean, you name it, they're all in there. The one country that I didn't see in there was Syria, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what the fall of the Assad regime means for the Middle East and the rest of the world more broadly. I mean, seriously, what role should America play in restoring order to a nation where 14 million refugees were forced to flee their homes in the last, call it 15 years? I mean, a nation's geostrategic position is so very important to health in Central Asia. What are your thoughts there?
So Syria's there, but it's underneath the number 9 risk, which is called ungoverned spaces. And we include Syria and Yemen and Libya and Haiti and Myanmar.
Western Sahara.
And Sudan, by the way, which is a lot more important in terms of numbers of lives than what you just mentioned in Syria. And yet no journalists on the ground, and they're fleeing mostly to neighboring African countries as opposed to Syrians who go to Turkey and go to Europe. So we don't pay as much attention to them. And that's kind of the point, right? Is that, I mean, the danger in Syria, where the Americans had slightly more than 2,000 troops on the ground, and under Trump are likely to remove them and say, Turkey, you mop it up, is that if HTS is incapable of running a unifying government in Syria, which is, a reasonably plausible outcome, then you can easily have a big part of Syria that's ungoverned and would be fodder for a new ISIS caliphate. And over time, not 2025, and this report's for the year, over time, of course, that's something that will wash up on our shores too.
Ian Bremmer with us here. We're thrilled to have him here to celebrate his top risk. It's a team effort from Eurasia Group each and every year. He'll be with us for a good amount of time. June Grasso to join us here in a bit on this important Chinese social media thing, which I don't understand. Dr. Bremmer, one of the moments that stands in time for me is Ian Bremmer and Robert D. Kaplan with me together talking about a G0 world within Kaplan's Revenge of Geography. What is the most constructive path for moderates in America to get out 4 years, or dare I say 8 years out? What is the initiative that needs to be taken? Do we need to take Kaplan realist policy?
Well, it's not about foreign policy so much, although it is true that a lot of people that decided not to vote, that had voted for Biden last time around, report that Biden's position on Gaza / Israel was a significant thing that turned them away from the polls. And that's a place where Elon Musk and his targeting of very specific and important districts that were swing in the United States could have made a difference. But leaving that one piece aside, and it's not unimportant, of course, I would say most Americans are not going to the polls on the basis of Biden or Trump's worldview. It's more about what they're doing and what they're rejecting at home. And the fact that Trump has become a leader that attracts more working and middle class Americans because they feel like he's more interested in their well-being. The fact that he was able to get a significant majority of labor union voters in the United States, while Harris was, the candidate for urban, well-educated elites. And that's not a sustainable path for the Democrats, in my view. So they clearly have to reassess a lot of their platform that did not appeal to the average American that did not feel taken care of. More billionaires put money into Harris's campaign than did Trump's. That tells you something.
Dr. Bremmer, the U.S.-China relationship's at the forefront of geopolitical risk in the current beta regime. Yet if we do see something like 60% tariffs, do you really think that China's going to allow the yuan to debase itself again? And if that does indeed occur, do we feel there's a clearing price in dollar yuan where the market can go to that can still allow China to grow at 5% per year?
I don't expect China's going to grow at 5% per year over the coming several years. I think they've got deep structural problems that are being made worse by the fact that the only part of their economy that is overperforming is their manufacturing export, which feels like dumping. It's $1 trillion surplus, and it's upsetting lots of countries around the world, not just the U.S. The U.S. is leaning into hitting back, which will occur with tariffs, though it won't be a 60% number. I mean, the top line election campaign numbers are never the numbers we see. But even if it's 25%, which I think is more plausible in the early weeks and months, you're not just talking about U.S.-China. You're also talking about the Americans squeezing other countries. We've already seen this with Mexico. We will see it with India, with Southeast Asian countries, for acting as a pass-through of Chinese exports to the United States. So it's very hard to imagine that U.S.-China relations are going to maintain the comparatively well-managed sort of incremental decline that we've seen in the last year and a half under the Biden administration.
I want you to sit on this question, Ian, because I think it's so important to all of our listeners and the people that, enjoy so much your international relations. This harkens back to the fear of the first week of August, 1941. A bunch of boats sitting off eastern Canada where Roosevelt and Churchill tried to begin to piece together the post-World War II world. And they were humbled by two major wars. The thing out there, Dr. Bremmer, is the only way this is going to get solved is the humility of a war. Discuss that. Is that what it takes to get away from the madness we're living in right now?
I think in the near term, we're talking about damage control. We're talking about countries and companies on defense. So, a lot of them are hoping that they just don't make headlines. Others are trying to figure out what they need to do proactively to kiss the ring. And geopolitically, you're going to see a whole bunch of countries acting the way Mark Zuckerberg has in the last week towards the commander-in-chief and towards his bomb thrower-in-chief, Elon Musk. By far the most powerful person around the administration, if I can call it that. Look, I mean, the way that you respond to a G0 world is either you reform and strengthen your existing institutions so they are more fit for purpose. You build new institutions that better reflect the demands, the opportunities, and the concerns of the present age, or you go to war. And I can give you examples of all three. All three are happening. We are strengthening NATO right now. We are creating new institutions, the Quad, the Chinese are building Belt and Road and the BRICS, and, there are other examples.
Right.
But the most energy is going into more conflict. The most energy is going into more war. And again, that is not geopolitically sustainable. So I think, your advice to other countries right now, given the power imbalances and Trump coming in and how consolidated his authority is inside the United States compared to 2017, where, he was riding the Republican Party's coattails, his administration felt very different. Not this time around. He's the guy, is that they have to recognize they're playing defense. And defense is more effective in depth. It's more effective if it's strategic, if you're not just, reacting to the latest headline. And it's more effective in numbers. In other words, the EU is better off than, say, the Mexicans because they can act collectively. And to the extent that other countries are capable of doing that in defending the things that matter to them, both in their own countries, but also in terms of international architecture, we will all be better off. By the way, Trump is going to get a lot of wins in the next year. But unlike Xi Jinping promoting a Chinese worldview, Trump doesn't get to do this for 20 years. He gets to do it for 4, assuming he's in good health. And then he doesn't anymore. So long term, the United States unwinding its own institutions does not strike me as strategically smart.
Okay, got to leave it there. Ian Bremmer, congratulations on the impact, the effect of your top risks for 2025. Of course, Dr. Bremmer with Eurasia Group, and I think it'll be a source of great conversation here.